Coming up on today's podcast.
And I think a lot of this is not the whole issue, but it's a big part of it, is the question of hate speech, which most people would agree that should not be allowed unless you have a very extreme definition of free speech. Is speech where you threaten somebody, where you potentially put their lives in danger? Is that freedom of speech? Some of the definitions that apply to platforms like X would appear to include that.
The British government has demanded a backdoor, and as anyone will know, if you have a so-called secure messaging system that's encrypted, if you put a purposefully made backdoor into it, it is by default no longer a secure messaging service.
You might as well have an enormous yellow sign saying, "Hackers can get in here."
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to another edition of How to Understand Today. We've made it to episode 10, amazingly enough. There's been a bit of a delay between this one and the last episode, so sorry for that. But we're back with a vengeance. And today we're going to be talking about an act that has come into play in the United Kingdom today called the Online Safety Act. And it has implications going far beyond British borders. Dave, Phil, what do you think is going on? This act has come under a lot of fire for being very quickly drafted, hasn't it? And having very far-reaching consequences that go well beyond its original intentions.
Yeah, well, as is often the case with all-embracing acts that are intended to solve a whole bunch of problems, it becomes a little bit like trying to hammer a nail with a cruise liner. It causes a lot more damage than beneficial effect, even though the intent might be. And it's one of these compound things that sounds simple. Let's pass a law to make everything safe on the internet. Sounds simple. Sounds like the cat is on the mat. But that the cat is on the mat is one of those rare examples of a simple sentence that cannot be deconstructed further. You get a sentence like, the present King of France is bald. It sounds like A is B, but hang on. There is no King of France to be bald, So it's like every time you go beyond the simple A is B thing, you end up bringing a whole load more baggage with it, which may or may not contradict your original intention. So you end up with something which is, A, not effective, B, unfair, a lot, if not most of the time, and C, impossible to police or implement. And, it's a little bit like, passing a law to make Earth safe from the rest of the universe. We don't have any dominion over the rest of the universe. And in many ways, the UK, and this could be any country that tried to do this, doesn't have any dominion over the rest of the world, and particularly something which is as distributed and as nebulous as the internet was designed to be. Let's not forget it was designed not to be regulated.
Yeah. And of course, this law covers things like encrypted messages, such as in WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. The British government has demanded a backdoor, and as anyone will know, if you have a so-called secure messaging system that's encrypted, if you put a purposefully made backdoor into it, it is by default no longer a secure messaging service. So
you might as well have an enormous yellow sign saying, "Hackers can get in here."
Yeah.
Yes.
Push here for entry.
And I believe it was proposed, I think, that maybe there'll be one version of these services for the UK and one for the US, but that simply doesn't work because, if you're a company that's doing, business with somebody in the US and they want secure communications with you, they're not going to want to communicate with you via this service if there's a risk that somebody is listening in. If there is a backdoor, then immediately all the hackers that want to gain access will know that backdoor exists, and they will try to find out what it is.
Focus their attention on it.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's worth going into the background. I mean, this is not just a UK thing. Various things like this have been proposed all over the world. I think just to give a little bit of background on the UK situation, this sort of boils down to problems we've often had in the past, in as much as the UK doesn't have a written constitution. Now, you would not get away with doing this in the United States because it would offend people's rights to free speech, which of course it does here as well. And there's a few things recently have happened which have hit the headlines, perhaps unfairly in some cases, but there's been issues of people being pulled up by the police for things they've said online, which I think most people agree, certainly in the context of what was said under those circumstances and jokes that were made and things like that, probably wasn't a very good use of police time. That's not to, I don't have to think it's nice. I don't have to agree with what was said. This is the old Voltaire maxim.
So, Phil, just interject there, because this is where people will, because one of the objections to the possibility that somebody could be arrested for saying something online, I think was actually where the arrest was justified, which was the case of the riots in the UK in the summer, where people were online suggesting that the crowds massing around a hotel containing asylum seekers should be set on fire. That's less to do with it being online and more to do with encouraging,
yes,
danger to other people. Sorry, I just wanted to interject.
Yeah,
that.
And that's a really important point, because what's important there is that's like inciting violence is already illegal.
Yes, I've actually heard somebody once said to me, just to illustrate the logical nature of the last point you made, there should be a law against all these illegal immigrants.
Well, the best example I've heard about this recently, and this is what we're talking about here, is examples of poorly drafted rules, which are intended to solve potentially unsolvable problems, which are put into place for nakedly political reasons. Now, it's not our intention here to get political at all. I'm personally unimpressed with the entire political system, as I think a lot of people are. But one of the examples that came out was they wanted to put a law in place that was specifically against contaminating people's drinks in clubs with the hope of them falling over unconscious so you could carry them off. Now, no, obviously that's horrifying. Funnily enough, poisoning people is already illegal. So I'm not entirely sure why, other than for saying, look at us, we're doing something about this, without really having to do anything about it. And that's the objection to things like the Online Safety Act, which it's another example of why not make all crime illegal? And then it wouldn't be. There's no enforcement mechanism for this. And I think that the government, certainly in the UK, has been forced to accept that some of the things that they are proposing to do, particularly around encryption, are impossible. And they've said they won't enforce them, which is something that concerns me greatly, because quite frequently recently in the UK, we've had a few things in the last decade or 15 years have come in, things like community protection notices, which are effectively laws that can be made up by the police or certain other public officials, which have the full force of criminal sanction. You could be sent to prison for breaking these rules, which are made up to suit a situation by someone with almost no oversight and almost no appeal process. Absolutely no appeal process. Now, again, you wouldn't get away with that in a lot of other countries, but they're all examples of things that exist with the government saying, well, we'll just be nice. We'll just put all this stuff in because it's just easier. We'll make all this legal. It's just easier to do that. It's easier for the police. It's easier for us. We won't have to do any difficult work. We'll just grab anybody we want and it'll be fine. And of course, it's not fine. That's not reasonable. And the government response to that has simply been, oh, we'll just be nice. Will you? And that, I think, is visible in spades here. It's law that probably doesn't need to exist because many of the things it outlaws are already illegal. It's almost impossible to enforce. It's a law of convenience to solve a problem that it isn't going to solve, because solving the problem is still impractical.
Yeah, I mean, most people would probably, you say the words Online Safety Act, and it's a laudable aim, but as we've said, it's the way it's being implemented that is the problem. It's not an overall idea behind it, the intention behind it. I mean, that's fine. It'd be incredibly difficult to enforce and control, as you say. Australia, of course, has taken the complete sledgehammer approach and has banned social media for everyone under the age of 16. So that cuts out a large demographic that will be affected by this. But, speaking generally, I know somebody who has a child with Down syndrome, and, understandably, there's a lot of bullying that goes on with people with disabilities like that, and conditions like that. And, he is all for this. But, it is difficult. It's, these things will always find a way. Bullying is going to take a form, no matter what. It's going to find a way of whether it's by text message or whatever. It's going to take some form or another. So yeah, it's a very difficult subject to solve, and I think you end up shifting the problem elsewhere rather than actually tackling the.
Yeah, you do.
I think for the purposes of this discussion, we should probably park the sort of danger to minors thing, because that's a huge problem in itself. And it is just one example of the sort of compound and unwieldy nature of this legislation, that it means so many different things to different people that how do you even vote for it? In the House of Commons, you get one vote. What if you think half of it's good and half of it's bad?
But of course, they've had consultation with tech companies, and not just with tech companies, but with technical experts who don't really have a stake in the game as far as making millions of pounds go, or dollars. And they have given evidence and said how difficult it would be to implement things like these backdoors to encrypted messaging services without compromising security. And they just haven't listened. The politicians don't understand technology or how it's implemented.
I mean, the understanding of, the public understanding of this technology is not particularly great. And I would say the political understanding of it is even less great. This is not, let's not drag this off into a bash the politicians thing, but they have been told that this is not doable. And I think it actually has happened in the States before. I should have looked this up, but I didn't. But I've heard situations here where the argument for breaking encryption is that, well, we'll only let judges do it. Well, how does the system know? This is the same trust situation as you get with, websites. Who am I dealing with? Who am I sending my password to? It becomes a contract. So the idea that there is some magical, the government here is referred to will only be enforcing this once it becomes technically feasible to do so. I suppose we'll just have to trust you on that, and make sure that you don't somehow just start enforcing it when it's not technically feasible to do so reasonably, and then start doing it unreasonably. But the problem is not one of technology. The problem is not one of computer boffinery and software engineering. The problem is one of, you can't do this because logic. It's not a programming problem. It's not let me make a bigger GPU and suddenly we can have encryption that's breakable only when you and I agree that it's okay to do so. That's not how this works.
I think if people are confused or just don't get it, because often seems with laws, people say, well, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to worry about. That really is not the point. You imagine if they put a back door in your bank account, your online banking. Obviously, the bank has access. Bank is the sort of god figure in that sense. But you imagine that, you could just casually. It wouldn't be safe to do online banking if there was a back door.
No,
it wouldn't.
I mean, I suppose, like you said, the bank has access, of course it does, but also it's very, very heavily regulated. Draconian regulation on financial institutions. So yeah, that's the sort of thing that perhaps needs to happen. I suppose the thing to make clear here is that I don't want to come off as a fan of big data, big tech, online organizations. I'm not a user of social media. This is a profoundly uncomfortable experience, even appearing on this. For me, I'm not a big fan of this stuff. I don't use Facebook. I don't use Twitter, X, whatever it's called this week. I don't use TikTok or Instagram. I make a little bit of money behind a camera, and I don't use Instagram. What sort of weirdo am I? So I actually quite like the Australian approach. I think, banning it for under 16s is shockingly harsh, actually, but possibly effective. And I think that a lot of social media is absolute brain rot, and I incline strongly towards the idea that it's a net negative to humanity. That's a somewhat controversial position, I know, but that's my view. I think social media is a bad idea. So I'm not here to talk it up. What I am here to say is, regardless of whether you like it or not, what is being requested here cannot be done and cannot ever be done.
No. And obviously there are other implications as well, such as a chilling effect on, from a journalistic point of view, people erring on the side of caution and not tackling certain subjects in case they violate some part of this act. And the tech companies themselves have filters on content. A prime example is YouTube. If somebody wanted to create a podcast that tackled the subject of unlifing yourself, which we have to say because YouTube will analyzes the videos, and if you use the traditional word, it will flag it up and possibly restrict the content. So when these things are done with these large companies, it's invariably done not by a human being analyzing the content to see whether it is whether it's viable content or whether it violates any laws. It's done by AI of some sort that can flag all sorts of things for nonsensical reasons, and it's very difficult once your content has been flagged to actually contact a human being to get it back again.
There's something to say about this, about the way that social media regulates itself. I think we all accept, I think most people understand that the sort of regulation that's being demanded, well, we should remove harmful content. Well, of course we should, but then we have to discuss what harmful content is and how we're going to find it. And social media only works because it's very general. It covers a huge amount of people, and therefore people of similar interests can find each other and discuss things. That's wonderful and marvelous. If you start restricting that, then it will stop working in the way it's always worked. And I think that there's absolutely a choice there to make between, and it's fairly binary, between are you going to let people communicate in an unrestricted way or are you not? That's whether you want it to work as social media. I take a dim view of social media, but again, it's another issue. The sheer scale of it is the problem. And you can't plausibly, even if you agreed on what all these things were, you can't do, what is being proposed cannot be done. But where I'm going with this is that YouTube is a website. YouTube can do whatever YouTube wants to do. It's not a public service. And one of the things that isn't really discussed about this stuff is that things like Facebook and Twitter and whatever it's called this week are being used like public services. And they're not. And this is where evil things like, let's nationalize it, come. I don't think the government would be any better at running this than anybody else would be. And I don't think that they would do any better at removing harmful content. I don't think that there would be huge amounts of benefit in doing that. But when something like Wikipedia, for instance, right here, is a vastly important public resource, Google is a vastly important public resource. Something that is, Google has more or less to be a monopoly. There's can only really, you want all this stuff in one place, has to be one of them. You can't really have competition. So it is a public resource, but it's never going to be run by the government. And that one of the things that happens is people go, free speech. Nope, you don't have any free speech on Facebook because it's a commercial organization. It can do what it likes. And whether that's one of the problems here. I think that people are using these things like public resources, like road networks and telephone networks. Well, actually, they're not public resources, but they're using them like public resources, and they're not.
Yeah, I also think that this shines a light on a wider problem, which is that the law always lags behind technology. By a long way. This has happened in copyright, still happening. We'll talk about this another time, copyright and AI. But almost everywhere you look, technology is way ahead of the law. And that's always going to be the case, because unless you can see into the future, you can't legislate for things that you don't know are going to come into existence. But it is particularly difficult to legislate around this stuff. But part of the reason is the international nature of the internet. Part of it is its unpredictability. Part of it is the fact that it's not. We have entities that define themselves differently to when the laws were formulated. So, is Facebook a publisher? Is Google responsible for if the results of its search pull up something libelous? These some in some sense these things are extra legislative. They're outside the capabilities of legislation, because legislation has not yet defined them in a suitable way. It's another argument as to whether they could ever be defined. I mean, they're always changing. So, but then within these undefinable platforms, you have almost intangible, undefinable, but quite obvious capabilities, like the ability of Facebook and other social media platforms to develop algorithms will bring stuff that it thinks will be of interest to you based on your activity so far. And where it gets really quite sinister is that it's widely recognized that the thing that will get you most engaged, we should probably talk about the term engagement separately, but that essentially the thing that will grab your attention and get you to interact with the social media platform most of all is when you're fed opposing opinions that you disagree with, things that are going to get you angry, because things that you like, there are things that you like that you will seek more of. But what's guaranteed to give you a knee-jerk and powerful reaction is something that you disagree with, that you think is wrong, to the extent that you're going to respond to it. And that would be all well and good in an equitable world. But what actually happens is that can become manipulative. So, so if there is an agenda behind this, it can happen by default, it can happen by accident, or it can happen without design, because of this phenomenon where things that you disagree with, encourage engagement. So, yes, of course, in an election, you're going to get more engaged arguing with the opposition than with the people on your side. But then, if it becomes possible to persuade those algorithms to work in favor of somebody who's paying the platform a lot of money, or other nefarious causal influences, then that's where the trouble really starts. Because I guarantee, myself included, you don't always realize when you're being manipulated in this way.
Yeah. I mean, I did hear a recent discussion with an ex-Facebook insider talking about how they did change the way that posts and content was served up, whereas originally it was much more about your friends and family and all that kind of stuff. And then they made the discovery that when they put controversial content up, it not only got the engagement, but people were staying on the platform for longer. And so they made that change, and then obviously fell down a very, very deep rabbit hole. And here we are. It's as Phil says, these are private private companies, and they can do what they want, and they can manipulate information in the way that they want in order to get the result that they want from people engaging on the platform. And as you say, outrage sells. It's the same for newspapers.
Hence the cartoon you must have seen where there's a guy sitting at his desktop computer, and through the door there's a speech bubble from his wife saying, darling, why don't you come to bed? And he said, I can't. Somebody said something that isn't true on the internet.
But yeah, it's right. It's right. And somebody I know has admitted that they are addicted to talk TV. And the word addicted is very, very strong, and it's just being
Just
addicted.
To explain, Talk TV is one of a couple of quite right-wing and not particularly aligned with, objectivity.
Well, it's Rupert Murdoch owned TV channel.
And there's something to say about this, in as much as this stresses my wider concerns about social media. And I think that there's a couple of things that are worth saying. The first of which is that when we talk about the algorithm, there's this idea that the thing learns what you're into, or as Dave quite correctly said, what you're not into, and throws it at you. And as such, when people say, they should adjust the algorithm to do this, they should adjust the algorithm to do that, everyone has their own. I mean, based on the settings and the information that the network holds about you, everybody has their own algorithm trimmed to that. And I've said this, but I may have said this on the podcast before, I can't remember, but it's almost like having a TV station with a commissioning editor solely dedicated to pissing you off, which is, people talk about, what publishing really means. And we touched on this earlier on. If I put a post up on YouTube or something, as I am doing right now, does this have the same, is it fair to call this publishing in the same way that Ofcom would call what Channel 4 does publishing? Well, clearly not, because we don't have anything like the audience share yet. We don't have anything like the impact. So is that really fair comparison? Probably not. And people would argue it isn't. I tend to agree. So there's that. What the problem is, and I think this is going to be seen in the future. Future historians will look back at us and they will look at what was going on with algorithmic delivery of content and see how dangerous it was. What's really new here? This is just, to some extent, is publishing. Just like, anybody writing a tract and handing it out on the street. What's new here is this personal editor, which is designed to put things together which will keep you on the site, which we now know is more or less synonymous, means putting things together that cheese you off and annoy you and make you want to yell at people. That is new. That has not existed at any time in the history of humanity ever before. Having something with this reach and this specificity, with this enormous lagoon of content, which then gets filtered down just to the things that annoy people and then pushed in their faces. And the thing to say to anyone who's got a problem with things that's seen on social media is, no matter what you think, it probably isn't that bad in reality, because social media will sieve out all the things that most annoy you and throw them at you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that your concerns are invalid or the people you're talking to aren't wrong on the internet. But that is new, and I think it's going to be seen as dangerous. I think it's lethally dangerous. I think it's having a corrosive effect on the very core of society. And I think if government was smart, it would look not for ways to try and break end-to-end encryption, because by the time it's very broken, it's not encryption anymore. What they might want to do, what I would encourage them to do, is to look at limiting how algorithms may be used to serve content to people.
Yeah. I mean, this law, this Online Safety Act. I mean, it's given the difficulty of controlling the content that goes out. I mean, I'm just going to read an extract from the Ofcom site. Companies can be fined up to £18 million or 10% of their qualifying worldwide revenue, whichever is greater. Criminal action can be taken against senior managers. So it's not just the company as a whole. It could be taken against individual senior managers who fail to ensure companies follow information requests from Ofcom. It also says that with the agreement of courts, Ofcom will be able to require payment providers, advertisers and internet service providers to stop working with the site, preventing it from generating money or being accessed from the UK. This gives the government basically carte blanche to effectively do a
Censorate.
Chinese-style firewall, on certain sites and prevent access to them.
There already is such a file. I mean, that does already exist to a certain extent. There is an internet censorship mechanism in the UK, which I can't remember the name of, but there already is a blacklist. And frankly, most countries have that in extremis. Not that you can't easily just sidestep it with a file or a VPN, but that does already exist. Whether it should, and they were very cagey about admitting it existed. Which the problem often here is not the fact that these things exist or that they happen, although that is, I would say, potentially a problem, but that they're often a bit cagey about admitting that they do or saying what's on the list, which I believe they still won't. I think that this stuff is, like I say, the problem. You can't solve this by playing whack-a-mole with sites you don't like. You can, I think, massively improve things. It's about the good being the enemy, the best being the enemy of the good. But at some point, I think you could do something good by saying there are limits to how you may use algorithms.
Yeah.
Self-learning things to serve stuff to people. That would help.
I mean, one of the more unintentionally funny aspects of it is this. The Online Safety Act takes a proportionate approach to mis- and disinformation by focusing on addressing the greatest risks of harm to users while protecting freedom of expression. Mis- and disinformation will be captured by the Online Safety Act where it is illegal or harmful to children. I'm not sure exactly how. The services will be required to take steps to remove illegal disinformation content if they become aware of it on their services. This includes the removal of illegal state-sponsored disinformation through the foreign interference offence. I'm not sure that's humorous to me, given what certain politicians say and post online on a regular basis. So I don't know whether we're going to see some of them end up behind bars. But it's who decides what is disinformation. I mean, we all have suspicions about Russian bots posting on Twitter and various other things. Where is this line? How on earth do you go?
There's no line, is there? There's a fuzzy grey area.
It's not even a fuzzy grey area. It's a whole universe of disagreement and ambiguity and discontinuity, and it's ultimately based on opinion. I just want to restate, I think all of us are totally in favour of, a safer world for people who use the internet, and particularly, young people who don't have the maturity to cope with what they're fed, and also who in their teenage years are in a sort of heightened state of self-consciousness where this kind of thing can be most harmful. But you just get the impression that so many laws like this are written by people who don't really know what an internet is.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this kind of sort of restriction of information would probably be better performed on new devices. So when you set the device to somebody under age 16 on an iPad or whatever device it is, they're capable enough now to read the information that is coming through and to filter out certain things and to read the information coming live and do a pre-approval on it. That's how I think it would probably be better implemented, because then you're getting it in real time. It's not somebody. It's not an internet service or social media site having to somehow capture billions of posts or content, and in the hope that they manage to stop the content. But if the device can actually censor this stuff live as it comes onto the display, for people of a certain age group,
it also doesn't matter. It's source independent. It doesn't matter whether you've found yourself some incredibly dodgy site. I think that's good. But going back to the question of adjudication, opinion, so much again, as I said, this thing is a cruise ship rather than a hammer, and there are areas where actually all three of us, coming from a sort of, film content creation background, have come across times when we thought we were perfectly entitled to film something because you're in what could be more public in a public space. And yet whole swathes of the country, particularly in London, you can't freely do things like film it. You can't necessarily point your video camera at St Pancras Station or King's Cross Station and not have someone tell you that you're not allowed to film there. And I generally, if you stand up for yourself and you say, can you give me chapter and verse of the law that says I can't do this and what will happen if I do? Yeah, that was been the case for sort of 20, 30 years. And then smartphones come along and you'll find that people taking pictures on their smartphones, which were probably better in higher definition than the videos that we were making 15 years ago, they'll be ignored. Almost nobody says to somebody taking a picture with their smartphone, you can't take that. But if you have a professional looking video camera, this is just, even to people who have no interest in filmmaking, that's so arbitrary.
Yeah, I mean, places like Tower Bridge are private property. So if you do turn up with a professional camera on the middle of Tower Bridge, you will generally be asked to leave. But as you say, if you're using a smartphone, you'll get away with it. But the thing is that just because you're using a smartphone, it doesn't mean you're not making a commercial video. With people generating money online, that is a commercial application. So if you go to London and you do a vlog on Tower Bridge and you go back and post it and you've got 1 million subscribers to your channel, then that is a commercial use, and they could unwittingly open themselves up to some sort of litigation. I don't know how fast they are, but
yeah, I mean, this is a tricky one. It has a lot of relevance because a lot of what's being proposed for these new internet laws are fundamentally extensions of rules that have existed in the real world for a while. And I think, the photography thing, I mean, that came about most of the time when that sort of thing happens on the streets, certainly in London, and people start waving the word terrorism about very quickly. And I think that when people start making rules about, there are political trip points that set people off. And I think when people start making rules about the internet, the word child abuse start springing up very quickly. And regardless of how important and terrible those things are, terrorism, child abuse, nobody likes those things. That doesn't make technically infeasible things become feasible. And I think that the ultimate solution to it is that I'm about to tell people to pull their socks up, which is a terribly boomer thing to say, and I'm not that old, but the ultimate realization with the internet is it's a bad part of town potentially. And there's certainly from, this goes back to the youngsters thing, which we don't want to dwell on, but there's certainly a lot of pressure from certain people who want to have kids, give them smartphones. And yeah, that's really hard because they can take the smartphones to school and they can go look at anything they want on the way home. And the reason I think of this is that it goes back to what Si was saying about doing censorship on your phone. If you want to block stuff, people go, why didn't the government block this? Well, you can block it on the kid's phone. You can do that anytime you like. You do have to learn how to. And what I would do potentially if I had a kid, I'm not a father, but if I had a kid, I'd probably be whitelisting stuff. I absolutely would do that. And even then I'd be very cautious. But the realization has to be the internet is not necessarily a nice place. It's not going to be made a nice place by laws like this or any other law, because it can't be. It's a completely open, unfettered thing. As Dave said at the beginning, it was designed to be. You can't stop it. Stop trying, and stop trying things that don't work, easy, facile things that sound good if you're a politician, but cannot work, and start dealing with less easy, less attractive things that potentially do work.
Yeah, because otherwise you end up with this tautology again that, let's make crime illegal. Sorry, Simon, go on.
I was just going to say, as Phil said earlier, a lot of stuff that is covered is already legal.
Yeah, but and so we have laws in this country and most other countries where you can't do criminal stuff on on a dark, badly lit street or a back alley. Bad stuff will happen, and well, I guess what I'm saying is that there's no law you can pass to stop that.
No. I mean, I guess just to take Phil's point, usual position as a devil's advocate, the technology companies, well, I could say as a defender of the Online Safety Act, say that the technology companies, okay, it's very difficult to enforce some of these controls that are coming in, but it's probably, well, it is undeniable that the social media companies have encouraged certain types of content. And, that encouragement has made things worse. They've kind of made a rod for their own back, really, by allowing this to fester.
I mean, they have. And I think that's because, now, once again, I'm going to seem like I'm defending social media companies, which heaven forfend, but I don't think this was done intentionally. I don't think they set out to deliberately generate a business model for social media that specifically relied on annoying people, making them angry, and making them shout at each other online. I think that emerged as an emergent property of what social media is. I don't think that was done on purpose. I do think that in order to solve that, then some of these companies are going to have to be told, you can't have these absurdly enormous inflated profits, because we're going to have to crunch down on this being done because it's having a really bad effect on society. And that would make the internet a safer place, I think. It's never going to be completely safe. And the problem with this stuff is you end up being accused of victim blaming, which is a phrase that is used in relation to some of the most horrible crimes that happen in humanity. And the answer is, yeah, but I lock my door when I go out. And I would not walk away from my house and leave it open. If I then got robbed, I would expect someone to say, you should have locked your house. And people need, if they're vulnerable people, whether they're young, mental illness, whatever, if there are people who need to not be exposed to this stuff, then whoever's responsible for those people needs to not allow them to be exposed to this stuff. And you can't do that any more than you would allow such a person to wander the dark alley that Dave was talking about. And if that's victim blaming, well, I don't think that's a fair phrase, but yeah, so be it, because someone has to take account of this. And if you don't, terrible things will happen, and they have.
Really good points, Phil. I think there's an additional aspect to this, which is the cultural aspect, which feeds into the algorithm. So, for example, for a long time, advertising has encouraged particularly, young women to have perfect bodies, flawless appearance. And of course, if you don't, you're kind of othered by this. You're self-othered by it. And, that can lead to very drastic consequences, but it is exacerbated by the algorithms and by the trends that those algorithms encourage. So part of it's a cultural thing. Part of it is saying it's not acceptable. It might, it's what we used to call, kindness, tolerance, equality, and so on. These days, a lot of people would call it woke. I essentially call wokeness kindness. So, and it is that kind of apparent contradiction. How can the same concept mean such different things to different people? That is an example of the ability of social media to, if you like, whether it's intentional or whether it's emergent, to manipulate people's opinions.
I mean, sorry, Phil.
It's really a quick thing. It goes back to the thing I said earlier. Yeah, I don't use the word woke because I don't think it's well defined enough for anybody to understand. I don't know, but Where was I going with this?
Well,
It goes back to, okay, this is where I was going with it. The reality is that, yeah, you're right, in that this is actually stuff that's all existed for as long as there's been humanity, and certainly as long as there's been like commercial advertising in newspapers and things. None of what social media is doing is new. It's just the degree to which it can do it, and the specificity and the sheer range and reach and scale it can do it is making several pre-existing problems that normal societal mechanisms were adequate to deal with are becoming undeal-withable by normal societal mechanisms. So you have an enormous increase in young women feeling appalling about themselves because they're seeing pictures online that are completely unachievable, and other related problems. So yes, but I think social media and the algorithm has made it vastly worse.
Yeah. I mean, I think, governments probably could do better with working with these companies. I mean, it's undeniable that, X or Twitter did become a lot worse after Mr. Musk took it over. He pretty much fired all the people responsible for, overseeing harmful content and that sort of thing. And Facebook has done a very, very similar thing. It has moved its central operations for that kind of thing to, is it Texas or somewhere? And he's made a point of saying that he's going to be less harsh with the way that information is disseminated and I say censored, but it's basically allowing a much wider free for all on these platforms, which these companies can do things to reduce harmful content. They can, but I think recently they have gone. Yeah, but I mean they have gone in the opposite direction. Whereas before they were chipping away at it, they've effectively actively gone in completely the opposite direction now. I'm not sure that putting a sledgehammer through on a badly formed law is the best way to do it, particularly when we're talking about an international company. But there are things that they can do. It's not. I think it would be wrong to say that the companies shouldn't bother trying because it's difficult to do it. It's always good to have some kind of system in place to have protections there. But this law is just so badly thought out and so wide reaching with unintended consequences that it's simply unpractical to have on the statute.
I think that I think you're absolutely right. And I slightly expand on that idea to say, when you've got all these people sat at what was Twitter to deal with unpleasant stuff that's being online, and obviously there's, the stuff that's illegal, but then there's the stuff that's nasty, which the company, which might not want to be seen as pushing racism, sexism, and so on and so forth, extremist politics and so forth. You can't actually defeat that by having a load of people sat in a room looking for it. That's actually impossible. All that would ever allow you to do is to deal perhaps with people reporting stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe. I'm not sure I would have taken Elon's approach, which is to fire everyone. I would have looked for alternatives first, but that's never going to be the solution. You can't possibly deal with the scale of it and how many 100 hours per minute of stuff is uploaded to YouTube. It's beyond plausibility. I mean, you can't do it that way.
I mean, Twitter or X is in a kind of unique place in that the owner of that site or app is actively spreading disinformation himself and commenting on effectively Nazi propaganda. So when you've got the actual CEO of the company doing that sort of thing, I think a line has been.
And I think a lot of this is not the whole issue, but it's a big part of it is the question of hate speech, which most people would agree that should not be allowed unless you have a very extreme definition of free speech. Is speech where you threaten somebody, where you potentially put their lives in danger. Is that freedom of speech? And some of the definitions that apply to platforms like X would appear to include that.
But yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly difficult subject. There's no one defined good solution to it all. And as I say, I don't think it's a case of having a difficult problem, so absolutely nothing should be done about it. But at the same time, as I say, this law is so badly written. It needs to. If they want such a thing, they need to go back to the drawing board and actually come up with more practical solutions.
Because the law does one good thing, and it may be effective. It may do some good almost by accident in some areas to which it applies. So I wouldn't write it off completely, but
it's how it's implemented, though. Because I mean, when we talk about the terrorism law, anti-terrorism laws, which are now, we've had there's 4 or 5 journalists who have been arrested in the UK, and they and I think they're going through charges right now because of posting content about the situation in Israel and Gaza. And all they're doing is reporting on things. They're not spreading hate messages. They're literally
this is the problem. This is the problem. It becomes, whenever you debate anybody on this, you'll be saying, well, do you think that I'm something almost like a free speech fundamentalist, which I think is what Dave was probably talking about. And people will say, well, do you think it's nice for people to say that, Tel Aviv should be blown off the map or whatever? No, but I don't think it's a police matter. And I think that is sort of the fundamental point I'm trying to get at here. The problem is how many people threaten harm on the internet, and how much harm actually comes from people threatening harm on the internet. Gigantic terrorist atrocities are not going to be pre-advertised on Twitter, right? And I think that I would love to say, I think it's impossible to come up with statistics. You can't possibly generate statistics saying how many terrorist incidents would there have been if we didn't have hate speech laws. And so my attitude to it is people can say what they like, in my view. And if people don't like it, they don't read it. But I would rather know what someone's true opinions are. I don't, that's me. I
think that's true. I think that's true, Phil. But I also think that there are limits, whether they're legal limits or just moral limits.
So moral limits, absolutely, no question whatsoever. Yeah.
But
whether you want the law involved in this, I'm not sure you do.
Yeah, but I mean, we do. Words do have an effect. We know that things that the likes of Trump says have resulted in real life violence and events. So if certain things get spread around, I mean, conspiracy theories or the QAnon and all that kind of thing. I don't think you could ban something like QAnon, but I think when it comes to incitement of violence and such there has to be some kind of limit.
I'd rather say it's already doing violence to people is already illegal. I'm an enforcing existing laws guy. Yes, in the very extremes you can talk about it. I mean, even in the United States, where they have a constitutional right to free speech, there are actually limits on what you can legally say, which is probably fairly reasonable. I think that what concerns me is, as people have been concerned with the new Online Safety Act, is the fact that it prevents legitimate journalism. It's going to be used by politicians to crush things they don't like, and it absolutely has been. I could give you, and I won't mention names because I don't know if they're okay with it, but there are people I know who have been to the High Court to find out what information the Metropolitan Police held on them. Metropolitan Police claimed not to hold information on them, but obviously did, because whenever they were stopped, normally because they'd be shooting outside someone's office block when they didn't want them to, the Metropolitan Police would say, oh, you've been stopped before, so clearly you do have information on me because I've been stopped before. So when you say you don't hold a file on me, clearly that's untrue. So they went to the High Court and found out that they've been held on a database which was described as being used for domestic extremists. So when governments say, well, we're making this law and we're setting this thing up, we'll be nice, we'll be lovely, this is where we came in, we'll be lovely, we'll make sure that the police will be reasonable. No, they won't. That's why we have elected representatives to deal with the grey areas, to make sure that sort of thing doesn't happen. And that's my main concern. I don't think most people, the average random drunkard posting at 3 a.m. after a 6-pack of Stella saying X should punch Y in the face is not a police matter, in my view. But right now in the UK, it is.
This is going to play out over a long period. And one of the good things about this terrible law is that it's going to smoke out all the fallacies and all the misconceptions that were the basis for its formation. I think we should keep talking about it, and even speculate as to what should replace it. But it won't be anything in the form in which the current law is written.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's probably a good place to leave it, but we can leave on a positive note, and that is that Elon Musk has threatened to take X out of the UK. So I don't think anyone's going to really miss that. So good news for that. I think it's been an interesting topic. I'm sure we'll come back to this, particularly if we get any adverse effects from it. We'll leave it there, and we'll see everyone in the next episode. Please like and subscribe if you like what we do. See you next time.